everyone. It's an honor to be here at this year's BTS and appreciate the invitation from BTS and also Bob Weller to present today. I have come to find out since I have taken this job that folks tend to like to hear about enforcement as long as it doesn't pertain to them. So we'll get this figured out here. All right, we'll start. So the primary mission of the field is that of signal interference resolution that either affects our licensees and or operators that is caused by them. This includes interference that is caused to our public safety licensees, such as our first responders, two-way radio communications, wireless networks, and then additionally wireless networks such as those operated by AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint, and of course the broadcasters. We also routinely assist our fellow federal agencies in interference resolution. The field is under the Enforcement Bureau of the FCC and has three components. The first, and what we consider the most valuable, is the field investigative agents, which are dispersed throughout the country that provide on-scene capability to respond to signal interference issues. These responsibilities include assessing the interference situation, including the entity being interfered with and their spectrum rights. In other words, their level of spectrum protection, and the severity of the interference, and in other words, how harmful it may be. The investigation, which may require technical tools and analysis, is then used to determine the source of the interference, if unknown, and identify the rule violation occurring that is hopefully causing the interference. After the situation is analyzed, the field generally works on the principle of achieving compliance as quickly as possible, such as having a conversation with the entity causing the interference, advising them of the situation, why it's important, and issuing a verbal warning to cease the interference. Depending upon the severity and the timeliness of resolving the interference, additional sanctions may be issued, which we'll discuss a little bit later on. The agents have a technical background in electrical engineering. The second component is a legal team here in the district. These are attorneys well-versed in matters concerning signal interference and the pertinent sections of the FCC Communications Act. They work with the agents in preparing issued sanctions by assessing the underlying evidence and issuing the proper rule violation is being addressed. The third component is what we call the technology team. This group is called our Engineering Development Group, or EDG for short, and is tasked with constructing and maintaining our fleet of direction-finding vehicles, designing and implementing new software and equipment to resolve interference investigations, and integrating commercially off-the-shelf equipment. Another division we work with within the Enforcement Bureau is what we call the Spectrum Enforcement Division, SED. The scope of this division is primarily equipment marketing. The field coordinates very closely with SED. For example, when field investigations repeatedly identify a device that is causing interference, that information is passed to SED for possible enforcement action against the manufacturer. The field is comprised of 13 field offices scattered throughout the U.S. in 3 geographic regions. The significant population areas such as New York, Los Angeles, San Fran, Chicago, and Miami have offices, as these are the locations where the spectrum is more congested and therefore more susceptible to interference. 2 of the offices are what we classified as the Tiger Team in Columbia, Maryland, and Denver, Colorado. And besides their typical office responsibilities, they respond to headquarters-directed initiatives, such as supporting the ongoing unauthorized broadcast pirate investigations. The 13 field offices, as we mentioned, are divided among the 3 geographic regions, with the regional offices located in Columbia, Maryland. That's also where the OET lab is located, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. 2 additional locations in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and Anchorage, Alaska, are forward deployed stations where we have equipment that can be utilized by agents and fly in, and we also have on-scene contractors who can respond. The field's investigations are triggered by complaints that are submitted to us. The field generally does not pursue its own initiatives and instead relies upon its licensees to report harmful interference complaints. The highest priority complaints are those filed by public safety entities and other federal agencies. The field has a 1-day response metric for addressing these types of complaints. The second level priority complaints are those filed by our licensees, such as broadcasters and wireless carriers. For these types of complaints, we request that they use their resources first to resolve the interference, and if unsuccessful, then to contact us. Our last category of complaints we work are what we call the consumer complaints filed by the Consumer Governmental Affairs Bureau within the Commission. Interference complaints generally have several interference portals where they can be submitted. For public safety entities, including our federal agencies, they're encouraged to call the 24-hour operations center, which is shown on this slide. They have the processes to get the complaint to the proper field office. If it's for non-public safety, please contact the CGB Bureau and file an online complaint, and they will sort it to the field office. In the next couple of months, we'll be having a new online interference portal that will be hopefully much easier and allow us to have much more quickly of getting it to the field offices. So stand by for further information on that. In the discussion of interference, which is our prime directive, it's important to note the different types of interference. So drawing upon our trusty FCC rules, the FCC has specific types of interference that are contained in Part 15 and 18 of the rules. The first one is interference caused by an intentional emitter. This is a device whose principal purpose is to radiate RF energy, such as a radio station transmitter, garage door opener, Wi-Fi transmitter, or even a jammer. Many times the equipment is not properly configured or simply malfunctioning. Recent examples in the field was a broadcast FM station that began to emit a third-order intermod product in the FAA aeronautical spectrum. That station was required to cease transmitting until the interference was resolved. Another common example are in-building signal boosters that oscillate and produce spurious emissions all across the band. Unintentional emitters are another type. These are caused by devices that produce energy within the device but not intended to radiate. Devices that contain logic circuits, such as computers, fit this classification. A recent example we worked was in the Bronx. T-Mobile filed an interference complaint. This is all public information. Agents went and found it was a Bitcoin miner computer system. This is kind of a souped up computer that apparently was using a pretty good clock frequency and was hitting one of the T-Mobile 700 megahertz. So we responded, convinced the operator of this computer that yes, we know about your device and it is causing interference, and he either ceased mining or got another machine, unsure, but the interference was resolved. Incidental emitters are those that generate, the third category, that generate RF energy in the course of its operation. Although the device is not designed to generate or emit RF energy, these are mechanical light switches and motors. Industrial, scientific, and medical equipment, Part 18 of the rules, is where RF energy is used for providing energy for purposes other than communications. Examples include microwave ovens and lighting devices. After the interference investigation is complete and a finding is made as to the violation, the sanction process is initiated. Many times this may occur on scene, where the FCC agent makes a preliminary determination of the violation and gives an on-scene warning. A recent example is when we were working an aeronautical public safety interference case in Texas, and the direction finding determined that the interference was coming from a single-family residence. The residence was not home, and it was a Friday evening as well, so the agent spoke to the next-door neighbor and described the situation and the urgency of the matter. The neighbor called the resident, and after discussing the situation with the agent, the resident, who was also the homeowner, gave permission for the agent to enter the property. The agent determined the source of the interference was a stereo component receiver. After the owner gave permission to unplug the device, the interference ceased. Compliance achieved. At that time, a verbal warning was given over the phone not to re-energize the unit, and as in a public safety case, a mailed notice of harmful interference was also sent out from the regional office. Another point of this example is to illustrate the field's educational role in dealing with non-licensees. Agents often have to explain as much as possible in layman terms that we are legitimate federal agents and why it's important to resolve the interference in a non-adversarial manner. Getting back to the types of sanctions, the agents may issue an on-scene notice, such as a notice of unlicensed operation, for example, for a pirate operation, or a notice of harmful interference. As mentioned, our policy is for the field to be compliance-driven, so we start by pursuing the lowest level of sanction that will obtain compliance in most circumstances. The formally issued sanctions include unpublished warning letters, the notice of harmful interference, or what we call no-highs. These are usually limited to cases involving unlicensed operation or harmful interference. It basically gives the same warning as a higher level sanction, but does not require the same level of evidence. Published sanctions issued at the regional level include notices of unlicensed operation, or what we call NOYOs, and notices of violation, NOVs. A notice of unlicensed operation, NOYO, is issued to an operator of an unlicensed station and warns the operator that the operation is not authorized, and continued operation without a valid radio station license violates federal law. The NOYO states that such continued operation would subject the operator to severe penalties, including but not limited to substantial monetary fines, in-rem arrest action against the equipment, and criminal sanctions, including imprisonment against the operator. This includes unlicensed broadcast stations, but may include unauthorized use of signal boosters. NOYOs are issued based upon evidence gathered by the FCC agents, for example, direction finding and field strength measurements showing that it's above the Part 15 unlicensed micro-powered limits. The NOVs, notice of violations, are issued to licensees, permittees, and others holding FCC authorization for violations of the Act and/or the communications rules, the Commission's rules, rather. Like NOYOs, NOVs are supported by evidence collected by the field agents. An example would be a licensee operating at variance from their technical parameters, such as overpowered, transmitting from an improper location, or operating in excess of their permitted out-of-power, out-of-band emissions. The primary evidence of the violation is gathered by the FCC agent during the on-scene inspection. Now, sanctions generally issued from headquarters are forfeiture related. A notice of apparent liability for forfeiture, or what we call an NAL, proposes a monetary forfeiture for an apparent violation of the Act, the Commission's rules, a Commission order, or the terms and conditions of a station's authorization. The NAL is a proposed action. The NAL process is also a paper proceeding. There is no administrative hearing prior to the assessment of the forfeiture. Once an NAL has been issued, the subject may pay the forfeiture, file a response arguing that the forfeiture should be canceled or reduced, or do nothing. If the subject files a response or does nothing, the Commission must issue a final forfeiture order. The forfeiture order may assess a forfeiture in the amount proposed in the NAL, or assess a forfeiture in amount less than that proposed in the NAL. The subject does not pay the monetary forfeiture imposed in the forfeiture order, the Commission may refer to the case to the Department of Justice that will pursue a trial de novo as required under the Communications Act to enforce the monetary forfeiture. One of the last sanctions is what we call the citation, and this is to provide notice to parties who don't customarily conduct business at the FCC. For example, if the operation of an unintentional emitter, such as a building owner with an electronic lighting ballast or other lighting products that cause interference, they may receive a citation to cure it before going to a monetary process. It is a publicly issued sanction. Under the Communications Act, the FCC must issue a citation to a non-regulated party before it can issue an NAL. The last one, in-rem seizures. The Commission is authorized to pursue in-rem seizures only in accordance with Section 510 of the Communications Act, which authorize in-rem seizures pursuant to a lawful court order. These seizures are generally a tool of last resort to prevent the continued unauthorized use of equipment that is causing harm to the public or other unlawfully authorized communication systems or equipment. Cases in which the Commission might pursue such an in-rem include pirate radio operations, signal jammers, and equipment causing harmful interference to critical public safety communication systems. In-rems are filed in federal court by the Department of Justice through the U.S. Attorney's Office. Once the court issues a warrant to seize the equipment, FCC agents provide technical assistance to the marshals, which is the agency charged with executing the warrant. The field in calendar year 2017 performed a little bit over 1,300 investigations. These were mostly RF investigations related where our staff performed substantive work. Approximately a quarter of the categories is our highest priority, public safety. This includes our first responder licensees and also our federal agency partners, which are primarily the FAA and the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard would be the Channel 16 Maritime 911 system. The Coast Guard offers a very, very thorough DF finding network along much of the coast of the U.S. So if a boater, recreational boater is in distress in particularly, they can call to the Coast Guard. If there is a jammer or a radio that what we call is a stuck mic continuously broadcasting on Marine Channel 16, it can interfere and degrade their direction finding capabilities, causing a safety and life issue. Beyond that, beyond the public safety, we do quite a bit of pirate work, which is a current high priority for the Commission on the order of 20%. Over 95% of our interference cases are for spectrum below 6 gigahertz, and most of those are below 1 gigahertz. Identified on this slide are the most common interference ranges that we are investigating, starting at the top, the FM broadcast band, 88 to 108. Below that would be the 700 megahertz LTE band, 4G. Below that would be a lot of the land mobile spectrum, still being heavily used by public safety and other entities. And the fourth ranking is the traditional legacy cellular band, which includes some land mobile, and also that's where Sprint has a large number of their operations. This is an interesting slide. So focusing on some of the devices, unintentional RF emitting devices that cause interference, especially from 700 megahertz to 2.5 gigahertz. These are some of the issues that we see quite a bit of. Signal boosters, these are the devices that are re-amplifying cellular signal levels, and they can slip into self-oscillation, and their spectrum can deviate, and that self-oscillation can appear in anywhere from the gigahertz down to 500 megahertz. Surprisingly, DTV receive antennas, think of these are outdoor antennas with a preamp that go into fault mode, go into failure mode, and begin to transmit a out-of-band emission from the preamplifier. And because of their, just because of their location outside, above the tree line in most circumstances, it causes a surprising amount of interference. DEC phones, digital European cordless telephones. This is more along the coast. Particularly Miami, where you have yachts come in from across the Atlantic. They may be operating in the European unlicensed band, but when they come over here, part of that spectrum falls in the PCS band. And of course, we're talking about 100, 200, 300-foot yachts here. 5 gigahertz uni devices, in particular the clock frequency from some manufacturers tend to vary and produce an out-of-band emission that causes interference in the 700 megahertz band. Lighting, electronic ballast from fluorescent lights. We had a recent case in Los Angeles where the building owner had to replace a few thousand electronic ballast. So that's an interesting conversation to have when you talk to a building owner who's not necessarily an FCC licensee, but identifying, yes, you have devices that are not transmitters, but they're emitting RF energy, and yes, you are required to correct the issue. LED signs, the Spectrum Enforcement Division of the Commission has issued a lot of LOIs and enforcement actions against several of those manufacturers that fail to have test reports, adequate test reports, et cetera. So hopefully we can see some greater compliance occurring in that. FM broadcast transmitters, the 7th and 8th harmonic, that's still a lingering issue to some of the wireless carriers. Cable TV egress, garage door openers, and security cameras. So focusing on the pirate activity, pirate radio is a very high priority for the Enforcement Bureau. The field has been investigating these operators, especially in areas with high concentrations, including New York, Boston, and Miami. Between January 20 of last year and June of this year, we have issued 242 notices of unlicensed operation to pirate operators. On the monetary forfeiture, we issued the highest pirate radio fine ever issued. This is to an operator in the Miami area for $144,344. This also included the landlord, as it was demonstrated in this case that the landlord was also operating in some circumstances as the operator by being able to control the transmitter, turning it off and on rather. Other notable actions, we used a consent decree for another Miami radio pirate operator. This is where the operator agreed to a reduced fine with the promise never ever to do this again. And if we catch them, then they have to not only pay the past fine up to the full amount, but be liable for the next fine. And we have also completed several equipment seizures for pirate stations. So quickly going over the tools that we have for pirate radio enforcement. I mentioned the non-monetary sanctions, warnings, and notice of unlicensed operations. We have monetary sanctions, NALs, consent decrees, which I just talked about, in-rem seizures, where we actually seize the equipment. Criminal prosecution is another option available under Section 501 of the Communications Act, but that requires coordination with the Department of Justice and convincing that it is worthy enough of a criminal prosecution. And junction relief is another one under 401A of the Communications Act. And what this does, if the Department of Justice agrees with it and it takes it to the court, and the operator is issued an injunction. If the operator continues, then that moves into a contempt issue, which has its own penalties. And the state prosecution against pirate operators, 3 states have criminal prosecutions: New Jersey, New York, and Florida. So here are some pictures of some recent seizures. Let me see, the one on the left is New York. So before we go in, the marshals go in. They have weapons, we do not. So you can see some of their bolt cutters and everything, and they're entering the basement door to secure the area before we're brought in. The middle slide, that's from the Boston area. Again, a recent seizure we did there. You have 2 transmitters. This is actually contained above the ceiling tiles in a church. I had to trace the coax lines coming in. Real clever the way they had, and they also had a computer system off to the side as well to control the audio. And then the photo on the right is after a hard day's work, have the agents, and yes, an FCC attorney holding the antenna in the back of the goods from a seizure when we coordinate with the U.S. Marshals on that inventory process. Going to the technology side, our technology group designs and integrates a variety of spectrum sensors and direction-finding equipment that are used for our investigations. These sensors include the classic direction-finding vehicles, where our agents determine the location of the emitters while driving. We also have a temporary fixed direction-finding stations that can be implemented when a longer-term mission is necessary, and also the bread and butter of the portable handheld spectrum analyzer, which is necessary when determining the specific building the device is causing the interference. Generally, the more active the device is emitting and the higher the radiated power, the easier it is to locate the device. So unauthorized broadcast stations and jammers too that transmit 24/7 from an elevated location are generally more easier to identify than compared to a low-powered Part 15 device that may be intermittent or drifting in frequency. Generally, for the low-powered devices, one must be fairly close to detect the interference, perhaps on the order of a few hundred feet, compared to pirate operations or jammers, which usually can be detected from much larger distances. Our most difficult cases are generally hoaxers into public safety two-way systems, where the operator will purposely block or divert first responder communications. If operating with a low-powered handheld unit, transmitting for brief periods of time and perhaps mobile, it is likely to be the most complex and resource-intensive case we can investigate. This requires the use of all of our available resources and technologies. We are also incorporating the network of these sensors into the FCC computer network, allowing multiple bearings toward a single emitter source that may increase the probability of interception. We are also developing a suite of automation tools that, upon a change in the emission signature, will immediately notify the agent of the change and produce a picture of the spectrum. The direction-finding vehicles are designed and constructed in-house. They cover a wide range of frequencies. They are covert and have cavity-backed angular slot antennas mounted in the rear ceiling of the SUV. The direction-finding functions are software controlled by a front panel touchscreen located between the driver and passenger seats. The upper part of the software spectrum display shows the amplitude of the spectrum over the span of interest. That's the picture shown in the lower right-hand side. The bottom part of that same picture provides the geolocation information, such as where the vehicle is located and the lines of bearing toward the detected emitter. A recent initiative has been to network these vehicles together so they can share information in a real-time and collaborative environment. For spectrum in the upper gigahertz, where higher gain antennas and increased antenna elevation are necessary to detect the emitters, the vehicles have an external extendable mass mount that is mated to the hitch. That's shown by the picture, the lower left-hand picture. Mission Pacific antenna, low noise amplifier, and RF filters are available to connect to the portable spectrum analyzer, and that can also mate to the antenna rotor to ease the antenna rotation. We have a fleet of approximately 40 vehicles, including some stage at remote forward deployed locations. Another direction-finding tool we have is the temporary fixed direction-finding stations. These can be deployed for investigations where there's an emittent or transient signal and provides a line of bearing toward that emitter. The receiver used is the same as employed in the vehicles, which is a mini-scepter receiver connected to an array of log periodic antennas. The tool could be used for spectrum sensing, monitoring the specified spectrum for a change in the emission, and if it occurs, send out an email or a text notification that and this operates on a dedicated network and is compatible with the vehicle DF systems, so a common software interface could be used to display the geolocation information. A software-defined radio, in this case a Tektronix RSA 306B, is employed for the spectrum sensing. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is what we call a wash tub. It's actually a horse trough feeder that contains the antennas mounted below it in the equipment enclosure containing the receiver, software-defined radio, computer, and wireless modem for backhaul. Another critical component, and perhaps our most important value added, is the feet-on-the-ground tools that we use to determine the exact location and the device causing the interference. This is for the deployed agent to have the handheld spectrum analyzer, the appropriate antennas and accessories to find the device. We have a general complement of such equipment, such as Agilent N9342 series, and along with real-time spectrum analyzers, such as the Tektronix Hall. We also employ some Rohde & Schwarz analyzers. The use of real-time analyzers in lieu of swept spectrum analyzers to capture transient emissions is becoming very important, especially when seeing interference in spectrum bands that use time division multiplexing, where receivers and transmitters operate in the same common spectrum. This is like Wi-Fi or in radar bands. We have developed a common GIS platform that's shown on the spectrum side on the left, including the direction-finding vehicles and temporary fixed sensors. This is a command post software. Besides showing the location and lines of bearing on the sensors, the software can also control the devices, such as changing the receiving frequency and modulation characteristics. On the right-hand side is the screen, is the spectrum investigation software, what we call SIFT, that works in conjunction with the remote deployed software-defined radios and spectrum analyzers. It notifies us if this is deployed and an emission exceeds the mask or goes off, and we receive a text and email. It's pretty neat. We have 10 of these that we're developing and sending out to the field as we need. That concludes my presentation.